Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will be splitting my time with the member for Langley Township, Fraser Heights. Madam Speaker, I rise to speak on Bill C-4, the Liberals' so-called Making Life More Affordable for Canadians Act. After 10 years of these Liberals, Canadians are facing an unprecedented cost of living crisis. In the 10 years that these Liberals have been in power, housing costs have doubled, rent has doubled, mortgage costs have more than doubled, food prices have skyrocketed. Indeed, the recently released Canadian Food Price Report reveals that the average Canadian family will pay $800 more in groceries this year compared to last year. This, as a record 2 million Canadians per month are lined up at the food bank, and more than half of Canadians are $200 or less away from insolvency. Now, in the face of this cost of living crisis, the Liberals act as though they are mere bystanders. But the fact of the matter is that a big part of the reason why we are facing this cost of living crisis is because of the failed and costly policies of these Liberals over the past 10 years. Let's look at the record. This is a government that has presided over a fire hose of reckless spending and money printing that has fueled inflation. It is no accident that quite recently inflation had hit a 40-year high. This is a government that pummeled everyday Canadians with a punitive carbon tax that increased the cost of everything, including essentials such as food, fuel, and home heating. This is a government that year after year increased payroll taxes and other taxes and imposed costly new regulations. And this is a government that has managed to spend tens of billions of dollars building bureaucracy instead of the homes that Canadians need, completely failing to address the supply shortage within the housing market. So, in the face of that disastrous record, here we are debating what the Liberals are selling as the solution to the cost of living crisis that they bear so much responsibility for creating. The best that can be said of this bill is that it is an admission of failure on the part of the Liberals combined with a series of half measures. Take the carbon tax, an admission of failure. This bill repeals the consumer carbon tax. Now, if there was one policy that has been the legacy of this government over the past 10 years, it's arguably been the carbon tax. These Liberals said that the carbon tax was absolutely essential, that it was the best policy tool available to combat climate change, which they purport to be the biggest crisis of our lifetime. But not only that, the Liberals said that Canadians were actually better off paying the carbon tax. Why? Because the Liberals claimed that Canadians got more money back in the way of rebates than they paid in the carbon tax. Now, if that were true, then why would the Liberals be repealing that very carbon tax as part of their so-called Making Life More Affordable for Canadians Act? The Liberals can't have it both ways. Either Canadians were better off or worse off because of the carbon tax. This represents an admission of guilt on the part of the Liberals that for years they were misleading Canadians about the carbon tax, and that Conservatives were right all along, that the carbon tax was fueling inflation and increasing the cost of everything, contributing to the cost of living crisis. And I've got to say, with respect to the Prime Minister himself, that he likes to portray himself as someone who is very different than Justin Trudeau. But when it comes to the consumer carbon tax, the Prime Minister was one of the architects of the carbon tax as an advisor to Justin Trudeau, wherein the Prime Minister said that it was absolutely the right policy. And not only that, that it represented a model for the world to follow. And now he's done a complete 180. And so it is an admission by the Prime Minister that he got it wrong all along, and that the central key policy of the past 10 years of these Liberals was a complete failure. Now, while it's an admission of failure by the Liberals, we say it is also a half measure to repeal the consumer carbon tax. It is our position that the Liberals should repeal the industrial carbon tax. The Prime Minister's policy is to maintain that punitive tax and to continue to increase that tax year after year until 2030. It is a tax that undermines Canada's competitiveness. It is a tax that disadvantages key sectors of the economy. This at a time when sectors of the economy are grappling with 25% and 50% U.S. tariffs, tariffs that the U.S. ambassador said today are likely to remain in place for the foreseeable future. So here you have a Prime Minister who wraps himself around the Canadian flag and claims to be a great champion of the Canadian economy and Canadian workers. And here he is hitting key sectors over the head with a carbon tax hike on top of U.S. tariffs. The Prime Minister's policy, combined with U.S. tariffs, threatens to drive entire sectors such as steel and aluminum and other heavy industrial sectors out of Canada, and with that, it will cost Canadian jobs. And so it is why Conservatives are calling on the Liberals to axe the tax on everything for everyone for good, including the industrial carbon tax. And speaking of half measures, there is then the Liberals' so-called middle-class tax cut. It is literally a half measure insofar as it is half of the tax cut that the Liberals promised in the recent election campaign. We're 2 weeks into this Parliament, and the Liberals are already breaking key election commitments. So small, by the way, is this so-called middle-class tax cut that the savings that Canadians would realize would barely be enough to pay for a cup of coffee each week. It's hardly a middle-class tax cut. It's really nothing more than a gimmick, and I would note that less than a cup of coffee a week is really next to nothing in the face of the average Canadian family who is now paying $10,000 more in taxes than when the Liberals came to office. So, Madam Speaker, yes, there are some half measures in this bill that we can support, but that's the best that can be said of the bill. Half measures and an admission of failure and an admission of guilt of the past 10 years of the Liberals' carbon tax policy.